Good afternoon, everyone. The January 30th, 2025 Special Council meeting is called to order at 4:01. This Special Council meeting is a budget meeting convened to consider a report on the 2025 to 2029 draft 5-year financial plan. Following this meeting, we will be hosting a budget open house in the Community Center's Activity Rooms 1 and 2, just down the hall. This budget open house marks the start of the initial public feedback period from January 31st, 2025 to February 5th, 2025. Budget materials and feedback forms are available online at ucluelet.ca/finance and the district office at 200 Main Street. Feedback can be submitted to the office or by email to communityinput@ucluelet.ca. Feedback received by the deadline will be presented on a council agenda and form part of the public record. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Are there any late items? Seeing none, may I have a motion to adopt the agenda as presented?
So moved.
Councillor Kennington. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Mafty seconds. All in favour? None opposed. That carries. We have one report item, 4.1, 2025 to 2029 Draft 5-Year Financial Plan. This verbal report will be presented by the Director of Finance. Mr. Cadman, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll just share my screen. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your schedules for this special meeting. To date, we have reviewed the operating and the capital budgets. Today, this presentation will cover those budgets again, just to take a second look at it. We will also look at 3 possible capital requisitions along with their property tax implications. As we go through the slides, please interrupt me if there's any changes that you'd like to make. Today is the day to list those changes before we go and prepare the bylaws. There will be the open house after this meeting. The ACRD unfortunately won't be able to make it, but they would like to present to council at a later date. Based on today's discussions and community feedback, the 5-year financial plan and the tax rate bylaws will be created for presentation at the meeting on February 11th, which will mark the beginning of the official public engagement period. And then if all goes well, the adoption of the bylaws is planned for March 11th. So as I said, we'll start off by reviewing the operating and capital budgets, which were already presented. The budget is based on a $500,000 capital requisition, which is on the lower end of what was previously discussed with council, but based on the changes to BC assessments, that's where we decided to land to stay under that 10% cap for residential and commercial increases. So this slide we covered already, but it's basically just some highlights from the operational side. We see in 2025 a 20% increase in operational revenues. The parking program is estimated to bring in $400,000 of revenue in the first year. The district is reviewing fire service agreements. The increase is not yet guaranteed, however, the discussions have been positive so far. Now that we're getting into budgeting, that's when we're going to start talking to the HRD and start nailing down those numbers. The 2025 interest revenue is well above what was initially estimated. The district was able to lock in some fixed rate investment. This will help contribute to the capital spending, which we have planned for this year. On the expense side, there's a 2.76% total increase in operational expenses. We tried to keep it as low as possible this year and really try and allocate as much capital as we could towards the capital side because the water and sewer is where we desperately need it at this point. There's a new bylaw officer, which we funded through the parking program, increased recreation programming, which will result in increased revenue and expense. The fire department is introducing a few new items, including life insurance for members, a new on-call pay system, and a new software system as well. The addition of the water treatment plant in 2026 will increase the water system operating costs. When we get to that slide, you can see that it increased quite substantially, around $200,000, I think. But we'll see that once we get there. Any questions so far? Okay. So this is the we'll just review each department at a time and kind of go through any changes to the revenues and expense side. So the administration department revenues increased by 50% in 2025. This is largely because of the higher than expected interest revenue that the district was able to lock into. Using effective cash flow planning, we were able to take a significant portion of our reserves that were sitting in a high interest savings account, and we were able to move those into fixed interest investment accounts and really increase our interest revenues. The interest revenue is expected to decrease significantly in 2026 to 2029. This is due to the drop in interest that we've already seen, as well as we're using a significant amount of our reserves to fund the water and sewer projects that are coming online. By excluding the large gain and subsequent drop due to interest revenue, we can normalize the revenue increase to around 7%. The expenses in the administrative department increased by 0.63%. Included in this increase are several projects to increase the district's IT security. This includes a Microsoft 365 upgrade for enhanced phishing security, a Wi-Fi access point replacement, and a server replacement and relocation to the fire hall as well. There will also be a council camera replacement, so we'll get a nice new camera for this hall. Which leads into the council. I'm not sure if there's any questions on the admin side. So in council, there's a total budget is included in the administrative budget, which I prior discussed. The increase to council exclusively is 0.98%. Not much change, basically just a little bit due to inflationary costs. So on to the planning and development side. The planning and development department is expected to see an increase of 4.22% in 2025. This is largely due to an increase in building and development permits. We are looking at how we currently charge for building and development permits. No changes are planned currently, but that is something that we are looking for, just to update our fees and charges to be more in line with Tofino and other areas, as we are still a little low. The department does see a 12.2% increase in expense. This is due to adding a bylaw officer, which will be funded through the parking program. Without the parking program, the department experiences roughly a 1% increase. On the emergency services management, so as I mentioned earlier, we're in discussion with our partners to increase our protective servicing agreements. The final numbers have not been finalized yet, but the values above are conservative. Just until we nailed it down, we wanted to make sure that we're on the conservative side, obviously, for the budgeting. The increase based on these numbers is a 28.92% increase in revenue, which is quite substantial from the prior years. However, that will be adjusted upon further discussions with our partners. The emergency services management will increase an 8.92% in expenses. This is largely due to the life insurance, the paid on call, and the new software system, which I discussed prior. Yes, Councillor.
Can I just ask you a question about, did you say, I get that there's an increase. I was very for that. I think those are great things to have. But I'm just wondering, there's something you said there, do we have to look at, did you mention something about ACRD and looking at the agreements that we have? Is this just talking about the agreements that we have with our fire service, with our neighbors, or
yeah,
with
yeah, exactly. With ACRD and with the two nations that we have servicing agreements with.
So what does that mean? Does it mean like we might not be paying as much because we have to reevaluate the increase with how they feel about the increase and they acknowledge it and then we give them the increase, or ACRD pitches in a little bit on that side? Or
Yeah, so we might receive more funds because right now they pay us for fire services and it's quite low. So that's what we're looking at, is trying to increase those funds.
with the probably the ACRD.
Mostly with the ACRD, exactly.
Right. Have you spoken to the ACRD at all about fire services?
It is part of their budget process as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're not quite as far ahead as we are in their budget process, but yeah, we will be talking about that.
So it's still possible to meet them. With
Yeah,
this
for sure.
as well.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Sorry. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, we've had discussions with them, preliminary discussions already, and so they know it's coming.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've had those discussions already. We're just trying to figure out the best way to make that increase happen. But
Right.
we've had those discussions. They're aware it's coming. It was their idea to even increase and add an admin fee. So they're aware it's coming, and it's very positive.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Do you remember Sean Wood from AVICC got elected at the last UBCM? Sean Wood is a councillor from anyway, he started, there's a provincial push for funding for this right now, but we won't see it this year. Anyway, sorry, proceed.
Good. Any other questions on emergency management? Okay. Moving on to recreation. Recreation is forecasted to see a 3.64% increase in revenues in 2025. This revenue is derived from increased programming put on by the department. The department is also forecasted to experience an 8.5% increase in expense. This increase is largely due to increased programming, which is offset by the increased revenues. The department has also experienced increased janitorial costs with Amphitrite opening, as well as the new public washrooms coming online as well. On to operations. Operations is expected to see an increase in revenue of 100%, which is due to the parking program. Forecast an extra 200K of revenue and 200K. Previously, we had 200K of revenue and 200K of expense as a placeholder, which has been updated to 400 grand of revenue, and the expense side is reduced to 100 grand, which has a dramatic effect on the operational budget. The operation expenses are expected to actually decrease by 7.5%. This is due to the decrease in parking expenses. We originally had a placeholder of 200. We've reduced it down to 100. Excluding parking, the operational budget is expected to increase by 2.34% in expenses. Okay, onto the water system. So the water treatment revenues were decreased by 2.48% this year. This was done to bring the revenue more in line with what the actual results are from prior years. The water and sewer rates are under review, and this will change for 2026. But 2025 is accurate. That's based on what we've seen in prior years. Expenses were not increased at all in 2025. I'd like to thank our Director of Engineering Services for working through this exercise. We looked at the capital expenditures that are coming down the line, and we built out our corresponding effects on the water and sewer operating budgets. So we were able to not have an increase because we were able to allocate any potential increases towards replacing in the capital infrastructure. This falls in line with our strategy of trying to maximize funding for our capital infrastructure. Any questions on the water? Okay. So this moves into the sewer system. Sewer system, very similar to the water. Revenues are expected to decrease by 3.9%, but that's just to fall in line with what we've actually seen in the past, instead of what we had predicted. The operating budget was also kept the same as 2024, similar to the water system. We allocated previously budgeted repairs and maintenance dollars to capital expenditures. This is in line with the strategy. Just instead of, right now, because the infrastructure is old, our repair and maintenance is high, we can use those dollars towards replacing infrastructure instead of charging for it twice. On to Harbor. The Harbor is fully self-funded. We have seen a constant increase in revenues and expenses with a constant transfer to reserve. The only thing I would like to note on the slide is we are currently netting around 75 to 80 grand a year, not accounting for amortization. We will be looking to tie the Harbor net income to an asset management strategy to decide if that 75 to 80 grand is consistent with our asset management plan. So that'll be moving down, but because it's fully self-funded, it doesn't impact the rest of the budget. It's all internal. All right, so this slide compiles the expenses for the various departments. You can see there's larger increases in 2026 and in 2028. This is because the district is planning to incur debt payments for the water and sewer projects in 2026, which leads to the first big increase, and then the proposed fire hall in 2028. The reason that the debt hits in 2026 and not 2025 is the goal is to put off taking on the debt as long as possible. And so the plan is to not incur debt payments until 2026, because if we only take on debt late in 2025, the first debt payments won't come due until 2026. Essentially, that's why it's pushed out a year. I would like to note that the budget outside of the debt is set. The debt payments will be subject to getting the exact costs from the water and sewer. Right now we have Class D estimates. So as those estimates become more exact, the amount of debt and when we take it on will continue to get refined. Our debt management strategy will then come back to council for your review. So that's the only piece that will be subject to change as we get more exact final answers on what the water and sewer will exactly cost. We will be using reserves and cash flow planning to hold off on incurring the debt. Come this summer, we will likely have a better idea of the exact cost the interest rates interest rates went down last week. It's expected, the forecast that I've seen and the people I've talked to with CIBC, they think it's going to continue to drop throughout the summer. So the longer we can push it out, the better, which is why we're trying to use reserves up front and push out taking on the debt as long as possible. Any questions on that? Okay. This is the draft 5-year budget revenue side. So a few important things to note. It's pretty standard. In the annual grants is the Housing Accelerator Fund, or the HAF program. Over the next couple of years, we're expecting to bring over $2 million in grant funding. So that's a really important part of this budget. One other important part to see, the DCCs we're looking at finalizing as we update the policy. The DCCs, we don't expect to have that 2.5 exactly on 2027. We're not sure exactly when they're going to come due. We put it in there as a placeholder to match it up with the expenses. Basically, DCCs are to fund growth-oriented projects. So as that growth hits, DCCs will come due, and then the expenses will come due. So that could shift where it is in the budget, but they basically will be used to counteract each other. Any questions on that? All right. So that was the operating side. Is there any questions on the operating before we move into capital, which is where most of the real money is?
All good.
Okay. All right. So we've already taken a look at most of the capital. There has been one change in the affordable housing side, but we'll get to that in later slides. Otherwise, it's essentially the exact same as what was presented in December. If there's any questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt. Please hesitate. And then we'll continue to go through. All right, so on the fleet side, so there's a few carryovers. There was the backhoe and the GMC Sierra, which are carry forwards from 2024. I was updated on the backhoe that we have one found. We are just waiting to purchase it, but that will be going ahead, which is great news. It's coming under budget, which is great. And we'll be using some of those funds to go towards an off-road vehicle to help with trail maintenance as well. That was the only real change. There's the 2008 Ford Ranger and the 2008 GMC Unit 2 replacements in 2028. Those have increased from 40 grand to 60 grand to reflect inflationary costs. And then in 2029, we added the replacement of the 2009 GMC bucket truck. Other than that, nothing's changed since the December presentation. This slide just shows some of the current trucks that we have, what we're looking to replace. The top right corner is just a missing floor, because that is the state of our fleet. Not as much anymore. Okay, moving on to the municipal buildings. So the UCC storage adjacent, rec hall replacement plan, and the office trailer for public works are all carry forwards from 2024. The office trailer was increased to $100,000 from previously $75,000. This is to reflect the cost of installation. The UCC heat pumps were increased to $42,000 from $35,000. This is to reflect inflationary costs. I'd also like to note that the $3 million for the rec hall replacement in 2029 is based on the ability to find grants, and also be based on the amount of debt we have to take on. So that could get pushed out based on our ability to fund it, is essentially where that's at. With the current need for upgrades and infrastructure, including water, sewer, and fire haulage replacements, will be taken once we can fund it. Exactly. So moving on to harbor. So both the inner harbor walkway and the boat launch extensions are carried forward from 2024. The inner harbor walkway is funded through RMI and through harbor reserves. Any net income generated by the harbors is transferred to the harbor reserve at year end to be used for future capital projects. These are the only projects that we have currently. I know that we're looking at potential projects, but that'll be part of the asset management strategy. That's all we have on the books for now. Anything else will be funded through the harbor reserve and has no property tax implications. Any questions on the harbor? All right.
One quick question, if I can just jump in there. I'm not trying to beat a dead horse here, but it came up earlier this week, the Inner Harbor Walkway. I understand that money has been allocated in accordance with the decision made by the previous council, but we're not committed to necessarily spending that money on that particular project. Is that correct? We're going to have a chance to reassess that in the future.
Yes, Miss Fortune is going to bring a report to us about that.
Thanks. I'm not trying to be disruptive. I just wanted to make sure that I was still on the same page. Thank you. Please continue and don't mind me.
Yeah, perfect. If I could just add one point to that, if there is a change because it's funded through RMI and through harbor reserves, there's no property tax implication. The money that we don't spend in the harbor reserve would stay in the harbor reserve. The RMI funds would be repurposed to another RMI project. Okay. Parks and trails. So the DDF washing project, the high volume pit toilets, Wild Pacific Trail Bridge and walkway replacements, the passive Melfort Trail are all carry forwards from 2024. I'd like to highlight that the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and the RMI RDS will both be undertaken this year. The projects listed in 2026 and 2029 are subject to change based on the corresponding results from these master plans and the RDS that come out. Okay, on to affordable housing. So as I mentioned, this is the one slide that's seen some change since December. We moved the Lot 13 affordable housing contribution up to 2025 from 2026. We're hopeful that the contribution will come due this year. If it doesn't, because it's funded through OAP, it still has no effect on property tax. We can always move it to 2026, but we are hopeful that it'll come due this year, so we decided to put it in. And yeah, it has no effect on property tax, so it's fully funded through the OAP. Any questions on affordable housing? Roads. So there was 300,000 previously allocated to the Penn Road upgrades in 2027 and resurfacing in 2028. Rather than be so specific, we've allocated 300 grand a year to a paving renewal program every 2 years. Rather than having set for certain areas, this will allow us to spend the funds where we think it's needed the most at the time. Public Works did a great job with Modi to access funds in order to pave a large section of Penn Road. This will free up paving dollars to be used elsewhere. On the emergency service side, fire engine 2 replacement, the fire hall development plan, and the fire hall capacitor are all carry forwards from 2024. The engine 2 replacement was originally budgeted for $800,000. Our fire chief was able to find a great deal on a new truck that will actually reduce the actual cost to $700,000. We're expecting that to come due shortly. I think the first bill is supposed to come due in February with delivery in spring. So that's very exciting. That'll be coming soon. The fire hall capacitor and generator was originally scheduled for the UCC. It has since been allocated to the fire hall, so that's just a internal allocation change. The mini pumper truck has been increased from $500,000 to $600,000 to reflect the anticipated future cost. The fire hall cost will have a more accurate estimate upon completion of the fire hall development plan. However, based on various opinions, we have increased the cost of the fire hall to $10 million from $6.6 to reflect the anticipated cost of construction. All right, on to water capital projects. So the submarine inlet line is a carry forward from 2024 and will be going ahead in 2025. $652,000 will be funded through the Disaster Assistance Fund. The timing and a more accurate estimate of the outflows from the water treatment upgrade will be available in 2025. We're still waiting on those. As soon as we get that will be in a report to council. A large portion of this project is grant funded with ICIP, funding 73.3% of the project up to a max of just over $7 million. Once the timeline of these outflows is known, the 5-year financial plan will be updated to reflect them. That'll also come back into the debt management strategy along with the sanitary. That'll come back to council. The duplicate reservoir shown in 2027 is funded through DCCs. That's kind of what I talked about earlier. We're not sure when that'll exactly be due, but as the growth happens and we collect DCCs, that'll also trigger needing the second reservoir, which is when the expense will get triggered as well. As noted on the slide, the water system is going through a comprehensive review, so there will likely be changes to the years 2026 through 2029 once the findings from this review are known. Any questions on the water? This slide just reiterates the two main ones for the water right now are the water service line and the water treatment system, and the portion that is grant funded. Okay. Onto the sewer capital projects. This slide shows the updated sewer capital projects, including the new sanitary sewer project that was brought forward to council in 2024. More information on the exact timing and quantity of cash outflows will be known shortly, I imagine. And the performance assessment report is a carry forward from 2024 and will be conducted in 2025. As the exact outflows are known, like I said, that will come back to council, and then we can develop the debt management strategy. This capital summary is all the departments for each year through 2025 through 2029. The spending is quite high in 2025 and 2026. These are due to the water and the sewer capital projects. The spending in 2027 through 2029 will be more accurate once we have the Parks and Rec master plan, the RMI RDS, and the water plan completed. This slide is just the totals, the total revenues, the operation expense, and the capital expense. As you can see, it's quite high in 2025, and then as we go down the line, it's lower because we don't have all the capital projects. As we get the RMI RDS, as we get our water back, this will likely change, which is why those, as we go further out, it's less, just because we don't have those projects on the books just yet. Okay. Any questions on the capital side before we move into property tax?
Going back to the affordable in that one, and
Yep.
the feasibility study for that water tower lot, didn't we partition off at 50,000 for that at one point?
Yep. So there is funds set aside for the water tower feasibility study. It came due at less than we thought. I believe it's in the teens.
Right.
Yeah, it came due at much less than we originally budgeted for.
Right. Study may be eligible to be funded through affordable housing, but only if the site is designated for an affordable housing project.
Exactly. And because we are looking, it is looking at to be designated as an affordable housing project, it should be funded through the OAP.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. I think we could probably do a land swap on that one and do better with our money than that, but okay. Come back to that.
Okay. All right. So this is into the new stuff. This is the property tax side. So this slide shows the property tax impact for each property class based on the respective capital requisition. As you can see on the slide, we have a 400,000, a 500,000, a 750,000 requisition. We lowered these from what we previously had based on the change of assessments. If we went with the higher rates, the increase is going to be higher, especially after we talked in December. We wanted to stay under the 10% mark. So basically, we are recommending, based on that discussion, at the 500,000 mark. But as we go through the slides, that'll be up to council's discretion to make the decision at the end. So recreation and nonprofit has decreased significantly. If you look up there. This is due to a decrease in assessed values, as well as more tax exemptions being given this year than we have in the past. Utilities sees a large jump in assessment, which is why the increase is so substantial. The current budget is based on the $500,000 capital requisition, which remains under the 10% bar that we discussed at the last meeting. There's always some confusion on what the percentages actually mean for individual households and what that impact actually means. So in the next slide, we break that out as to what the actual dollar will be. So as you can see at that 500 mark, we have the 9.92% residential increase. We have the current business, which is 9.3. What I did this year is I broke out new business because when you add a new entity, it's taxed differently. So for example, if you have a 10% increase and the tax bill is $100, which for sake of argument, it goes up 10%. It goes from $100 to $10. If it's a new entity, you're going from $0 to $110. So it creates a larger spread. So I break it out like this way. You can see that the current businesses will see a 9.3% increase. The new businesses, it's not a 6% increase. It's 100% increase because they went from not existing to new, but it's just so that it doesn't skew what the current businesses are actually going to see on their increase. The reason I did it this year is because we saw a quite substantial number of new business assessments, which I'll go into the next slide, which shows what happens when you add new developments. It's quite substantial. So this is the slide that I was talking about. So we have 13 new commercial properties, which results in $138,000 of new property tax dollars. 42% of the total business tax increase is funded just through these 13 properties, which is exactly what I was talking about. If you have 100 and it goes to 10 versus 0 to 110, it's a substantial difference, which shows the power of growth and spreading the property tax over a larger tax base. 20% of the total 2025 proposed tax increase is funded just through these 13 properties. So that pie chart shows basically the new business and the existing business, and that's on 13 new commercial properties, which shows, especially because we are such a small tax base, adding a few new properties has a pretty substantial impact. So the next three slides, I looked at residential, mixed use, and commercial. For each of the capital requisitions, these are the numbers of households that falls into each category. So for example, if we look at the middle column for 500,000, 73 households will see a reduction in their property tax from $300 to $600, 142 from 0 to 300, and as you go down. So you can kind of see how it clusters depending on the requisition. So for the 500,000 requisition, just around 50% is in that $0 to $300 increase, and then you have 11% in the $0 to $300 reduction, 15% in the 3 to 500, and then you can see there's smaller properties as you go up. There's not a huge amount of change between the 400,000 and the 500,000 dollar requisition. Just where they are skewed in the $0 to $300, it goes to 52% at the $400,000, where it's 50% at the 500. You see the bigger change between the 500,000 and the $700,000. 750. So I think I wanted to break it out like this so you could see the number of people and also the percentage of people that are in each of these brackets and what the actual dollar effect on their property tax will be based on which requisition we go. Is there any question on the residential side?
Okay, I've got,
Yep.
so for the commercial properties,
Yep.
there's 13 new commercial properties.
Yep.
Could I get just a quick few of those, like just off
A big chunk of it is the new cabins.
right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay,
All right.
good example.
Yeah. Well, that's a big chunk of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I figured it was something like that. I
Yeah.
couldn't think of it, but yeah.
No worries. So this is moving into the mixed use. So I wanted to break out mixed use separate from commercial just because we have quite a significant portion of mixed use properties here with people having rentals out of their homes. So I thought it would provide good value so that the individual residents can see where they would fall in this line. So as you can see, between the 400 and the 500,000 requisitions, the big chunk is in the $150 to $300 increase. 59% at the $500,000 requisition and 51% at the 400,000 requisition. And then if you move up to the 750, you can see that it changes, and then you have 41% at the 300 to 500 level. So I think that's an important part in the decision making is where you see that spread and where do you think the community wants to land in the 150 to 3 or the 4 to 5.
What's is the mixed use is that a BC assessment definition or is that a municipal definition?
It's so both. BC assessments because they'll have a residential portion and a commercial portion.
Right.
So I took their class 1 and their class 6 and then the rates against them both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I always think of mixed use as like the pharmacy where you have like the pharmacy downstairs, then you have the apartments above.
That would be included as well. because that would have a class 1, which is the apartments above, and then they'd have the class 6, which is the pharmacy below.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's inclusive. If you have a rental out of your home, then that part could be class 6. So it's incorporate of anything that has a residential aspect and a commercial aspect.
I don't think BC assessment, if people have guest suites in their house in like a secondary suite, whatever, like say a short-term rental, for example, in a guest suite, that normally wouldn't fall under a BC assessment mixed, would it?
It could, if they have a business license and it's there's a commercial aspect and BC assessment knows about it, then they can include it as a class 6 aspect.
Do you think that BC assessment has any purview over like municipal licensing?
They don't. I think that's one thing that BC assessment is trying to crack down on is they do know that there's residences that are operating commercially but are zoned residential. That's one thing that they did come to the municipality to try and find out. Are there places that should be zoned class 6 because they are operating commercially but are zoned as class 1? So that's one thing that they're trying to. At this point, no.
Right. So at this point right now, I'm just thinking,
Yeah.
if people have, a couple of guest suites, short-term rental guest suites, that's still considered R1. It falls within your single-family home.
Yeah.
It's residential.
Yeah.
There's not. So that wouldn't fit under mixed use.
No.
It would.
Yeah, it likely wouldn't unless, for whatever reason, BC assessment thought they were running a business out of it and tax them as a class 6 aspect.
Yeah, I've had this conversation multiple times with BC assessment with Graham Held, who runs it for at all the conferences, and he sort of like, and yeah, he said it's not in their interest to really get involved with like municipalities and what people are doing. That's our thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was an interesting conversation because I said, is it ever something where you would want to find out if there's licenses for short term, and you would try and figure that would be a commercial entity? And he said, no, that was just up to us, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's interesting because BC assessment, they do the whole province and they have so many households, so they do mass valuations.
Yeah.
They don't have the ability to look at every single house and see exactly how it's operating.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Thank you.
And so that leads us into the commercial slides. It's quite similar. You see a big chunk between the $150 to $300 increase, and then a big chunk in the 300 to 500 range for both the 400 and the 500,000 capital requisitions. As you move to the 750,000 requisition, you can see that shifts upwards to the 300 to 500, and then another big chunk in the $500 to $700 range. Any question on these 3 slides? So these slides we included last year. We got good feedback from people being able to look at the slides and pick out where their house actually lands on it. So as you can see, it varies quite substantially. We chose properties that so when I looked at the same properties from last year, almost all of them went down. Which kind of skewed the information. So we changed it this year so that we showed some that went up and some that went down, just so people could take a look at the slides and get an idea of where they were going to land in their dollar value change. Any questions on this slide? All right. And then this is the same thing. This just looks at business property and then split class. So we have a few different things on here: bed and breakfast, restaurant, general business. Yeah, it's essentially the same thing. It just shows what the percent changes and what the corresponding dollar value change would be. All right. So that concludes the property tax side of this thing, which leads into the proposed motions. Before we get to the proposed motions, is there any questions on any of the things covered today? Property tax, operation, or capital budgeting? Okay. All right. So this leads into our proposed motions. We have the 3. So The proposed motion number 1 is pretty straightforward. That's just to execute the budget expenditures as we've gone through. The second one is the one that I would like council to deliberate. Basically, we have the $500,000 capital requisition in there. That'll be council's decision at where you want to land. The third one is we will create the tax rates based on whatever's decided on number 2. The fourth one is in 2024, we had the meeting on the Barclay Community Forest Reserve Fund, transferring the $1.5 million to the Legacy Fund to be used for grants and aids and creating that fund. If council still elects to choose that, then we can do this proposed motion, and then I will complete that transfer as part of this year's budgeting. That 1.5 is not set. It can be used still for the budget if that is council's wish. But that's basically the idea of those 4 motions.
That's great. Thank you, Mr. Cadman. So I guess we need to talk about the choice we have, the 400,000, 500,000, or 750,000. I know we did $1 million last year, so we want to take it a little bit easy on folks this year, I think. Although everybody understood and why we had to build up our reserves because it hasn't been done for a very long time. So people were understanding, but I don't think it's a good idea to hit everybody hard 2 years in a row. So I'm kind of leaning toward the $500,000 rate. Just looking for feedback from councils.
Sorry, you said 4, the 4 or 5?
500.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think people have had a tough year, and last year was huge, so.
Sorry, Sean, can you just speak closer to your mic? I can hear that you're talking, but I can't hear what you're saying.
Can I back up a slide? Is that all right? Is when it says split class and business property, what's the difference between a bed and breakfast and a single family with a short-term rental?
So the way that BC Assessment values them, essentially. So bed and breakfasts are more heavily on the commercial side, just because it's typically a more commercial and a larger commercial enterprise versus a residential that operates a suite out of their house.
So people in Euclid have a bed and breakfast. Is that considered commercial?
It depends. So, for example, you could have a portion of it that you live out of, and then that portion would be residential. Say you have a 4-bedroom, the 1 bedroom you live out of would be zoned residential. The 3 that you rent out would be commercial. It'd be on a basis like that.
Is that?
This is the first time I'm hearing.
I've never heard this before. I don't know if this is this new? Is this a new thing?
No, but you can have different classes.
So you can have a single family home,
Yeah.
right? And you can have up to 3 guest suites in that home, right? For a bed and breakfast, as long as it's under 35%, I believe, of your FAR. And no, that's still all residential. I don't think you're
I think it depends. It depends on how BC Assessment has it zoned. Is essentially what. So BC Assessment, I don't have insight into how BC Assessment values their properties.
right.
But bed and breakfasts are zoned differently from somebody that has a short-term rental in their house.
Right.
That seems funny because it's the same thing.
Yeah, I'm just thinking because as far as I understood it, people were allowed to have their R1 zoning with a single family home and have, as a mortgage helper, have up to, 3 guest suites in their house as short-term rental, or like there's other types of zoning like guest house zoning that have that.
Yeah.
But it's still all residential. I asked BC Assessment about that, and they said, "Hey, this isn't us. Like, we don't do this." Like, and I said, "Do you have any communication with business licenses with the municipality or anything like that?" And they said no, but they said like they would look physically. They would see how many buildings are on a property. They have like aerial photographs
Footage,
or like foot traffic, but I don't see like split class. I don't know if it's like how this works, or I've never heard this before personally.
Mr. Lawrence?
Yeah, maybe I can add some commentary here. So there's definite split classes are not new. They've been in existence for a very long time. So for properties that are there's a line when you, as soon as you cross over like 4 units, I believe, then it is designated as a business, and that portion of the property, based on square footage or formula of what that business consists of, is the portion that BC assessment assess as commercial, and the rest is residential. So that's where you get those split classes. So those properties are always have been split classes. So if you only have 1 guest room, you're not split classed. You're just a regular you're just a regular residential suite or property, and 100% of your resident is taxed as a standard residential property. It's only when you hit this target or this 4 units and you transition over with the CRA in from a small business owner using part of your property to an actual business that it turns into a split class.
A good example of that is Snug Harbor Inn.
Mm-hmm.
They've been split class for, well, ever since they've been built, I think, because they have, they started with 4 units and now they have 6.
Another one is, interestingly enough, is the BlackRock, right? So depending on their units and how many days and a formula they report on as to how much rental they have in a given year, they could be taxed either residential or commercial. I guess that's not split class, sorry, but you know that those things are already set. It's not in the hands of the municipality. It is in the tax code and with CRA, and they determine it. It's not the municipality that determines it.
I think I was just confused because the heading on that slide is like in this on the second half there, it says split class and business property, and then within those there's the cell that says short term or single family with short term rental. But
Yeah, bed and breakfast shouldn't be in there by definition in our bylaws and our definitions. A bed and breakfast is 3 rooms or less, so it's not a split class, so it shouldn't be up there. It should be called something else, because then we're talking about something like an inn. Like the term bed and breakfast is it's too loose, it's not used properly, it creates confusion, and putting it on the slide like that creates more confusion. Bed and breakfast typically in Ucluelet is still R1, and it would go in the top grid.
Yeah, I agree.
sorry, Mr. Cadman, to pull you into our contentious world of STRs.
It's
but
okay.
That's,
I blame who I got this.
It's important to clarify these things, because the community looks at this and then they start saying, "Oh, bed and breakfasts are businesses, and they belong in this and that," and it's leading, right? Like, so it's misleading to put bed and breakfast in split class when, by our definition of what a bed and breakfast is not. So I think we need to change that slide. Would you agree?
Yeah, I was confused. So it's like, I mean, I get confused easy, but probably use a little bit of a change there. Yeah, and I just know that I've heard, previous council. I think there was someone that really wanted to make bed and breakfast as commercial entities, so that because there was they thought it was unfair with hotels. So
Well, that's another conversation altogether. But
Right.
currently,
Yeah.
our definitions mean that it shouldn't be in that.
Well,
in
I
that
thought
category,
maybe
right?
it's
like we
not
can
that.
talk about that another time. But
Right.
like, as of today.
Yeah, it really shouldn't be in that category.
yeah.
That's
Alright.
You can probably take that out.
Yeah, easy
Cool.
fix.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions on the slide, or should I go back to the motions?
Sorry. Yeah, I'm done.
Okay.
Okay, so so are we in agreement that we want the 500,000 level
I think so.
as opposed to the we don't want the 750.
No, well, I mean, it's kind of strange to look at these numbers, because what really shifts around is the percentage of households that pay more or less. It's kind of hard to judge. Like, oh, it's a little bit more, a little bit less, but it is right in the middle. So
Yeah, yeah. The shift is sort of the bulk of the residences if it goes under the 750, the shift kind of goes down.
Yeah.
Anybody on Zoom? Councillor Mafty, Councillor Hoare?
Logically, pragmatically, I'd say that given the rate at which we see costs go up, looking at what we can expect to happen in the future and understanding the math that would support trying to build up reserves as quick as possible so that the reserves end up working for us, I would probably argue in favor of the 750. Having said that, you know, I also understand the realities and how the decision stands to financially impact people. I also understand that, you know, as politicians, we also need to make sure that we're balancing, you know, fiscal responsibility with representing the citizens of the community. And so based on that, I think I would be all right with the 500. You know, last year I argued strenuously in favor of really biting the bullet and trying to build up reserves, and that's what we ended up voting for. I'm not taking credit for that at all because it turned out to be a near unanimous decision, and I think it was in our best interest. So I think we need to sort of ask ourselves what we feel the community wants. Do they agree that it's better to spend more now and benefit more later, or is it time to ease up? I could go either way. If there was an appetite for the 750, I wouldn't have to be convinced, but I certainly don't want to be the one to try to convince the rest of council to go for the 750. I'd be happy with the 5, but again, I keep coming back to this being a financial decision, and we stand to benefit more financially if we can build up reserves faster rather than slower. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Councillor Mafty. I think staff will agree that that 1 million last year was extremely beneficial for a lot of the projects that had been put on the back burner for a long time. Mr. Cadman?
For sure. It would make contemplating the water and sewer projects a lot more challenging. Those are basically giving us the equity portion of the projects going in. That $1 million made a massive difference.
Exactly. I don't feel that we can do it 2 years in a row. Maybe take it a little bit easier this year. What I really like about the $500,000 level, if you look on page 33, the capital requisition effect on taxes, it's keeping the residential at 9.92% and the current business at 9.39%. So both of those are being kept under the 10% mark.
And we talked about that at length, that was really our motivation. So it's good that you brought that up because that brings it back to that conversation and deliberation we had over overall increases, and we wanted to keep it below 10. So I agree with that.
Yeah, that rate just seems to hit the nail on the head.
I do think that's a key point. You know, we it's not just today that we've had this discussion. This is the culmination of several discussions and a lot of back and forth. And I think when we made that decision to try to keep it below 10, it was for, you know, logical reasons. Like, it wasn't arbitrary. And the fact that now we're seeing the sort of final draft based on all of that input, I don't think now is the time to you know, throw all of the previous discussion out the window and do something drastically different. So that's why I personally would feel totally fine going with the 500. It's what we've talked about for a while. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Councillor Hoare, what's your opinion?
I concur with what's being said. We came to that under 10 decision before in our discussions, and I do understand how the 750 can help, but I also feel that 2 big hits 2 years in a row, maybe it's worth just doing the 500 and staying under that 10% for residential. And I say that as somebody who's, assessment went up instead of like everybody else is going down.
Mine went up as well, so we're in the same boat.
There you go.
Okay, so we have 4 recommendations then. And they should be moved separately, I believe. So I can make the motions, and if someone can second them. So I will move that council authorize staff to execute the 2025 budget expenditures as presented at the January 30th, 2025 council meeting.
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? That carries. And I will move that council direct staff to prepare the 2025 to 2029 5-year financial plan bylaw, including a 500,000 requisition in 2025.
I'll second.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? That carries. I will move that council direct staff to prepare the 2025 tax rates bylaw based on the budget outlined at the January 30th, 2025 council meeting.
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? That carries. And I will also move that council direct staff to transfer 1,500,000 from the Barclay Community Forest Reserve Fund to the Barclay Community Forest Legacy Reserve Fund.
I will second that.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
None opposed? That carries. Great. Is there any other business? Hearing none, I will move that the January 30th, 2025 special council meeting be adjourned at 4:57. Second?
I'll second that.
Councillor Kennington seconds. All in favor? None opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Can I just add one quick thing post meeting? I've received a couple emails from folks. I wish I could be there in person at the open house, and just for the benefit of anyone who's watching or who's there, I'm more than happy to receive emails from folks and discuss in lieu of being able to be there in person. And I hope I can pick your brains, all of you that are there, to hear what the vibe in the room is. My regrets for not being present.
We will fill you in.
Thank you kindly.
All right, so that's right on schedule for the open house next door.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, it'll be great to see you guys back when you're back.
Looking forward to it. Bye.